Welcome to another exciting interview with Kung Fu Conversations. We are joined today by the renowned, by the famous Marin Spivack. Thank you for joining us today, sir. I'm so excited to talk Tai Chi with you.
Thank you for having me. I think the introduction may be a little bit overblown, but I'll take it for today.
Yeah, why not? Bells and whistles every once in a while is not a bad thing. So
Sure.
I know you've done a great introduction on a lot of different shows. Would you mind giving our audience a small introduction as well, and then we'll go from there and try to jump into some maybe original questions for you, some juicy meat on some ideas that we might have for you, sir.
Okay, what am I introducing? Myself?
Yes. Yes, sir. Yeah, your Kryptonian Chen origin stories.
Okay. Well, let's see. I'm in my mid-50s. I won't give away the specialness of my age, but I started training martial arts as a kid, but I guess I got more serious about it in the mid 1990s. Started in San Francisco with a teacher who was known as Jean Chen. His name was Chen Yu, and he was the first disciple of Feng ZhiQiang, who was a disciple of Chen FaKe. And Chen Yu had a background in southern mantis, Zhuga, southern mantis, and it's not really mantis, but it's a Zhuga-kun. And he had studied that to mastery in Hong Kong. His family was from Shanghai. He had relatives in his family that had studied Yang-style Taiji Chuan and Chen-style Taiji Chuan. And over the years, he arced back into that and went to China in the maybe late 70s or 1980. And that's where he met Feng ZhiQiang and also Wang Peisheng and others, the brothers Ding, which are Wu style famous. So he was doing Wu style, Yang style, what's his name? Famous Yang style guy. I can't remember his name now. Those names that they start to dribble out of your brain as you get older. I don't remember his name. Anyway, famous Yang style people, Wu style people, and then arced all the way around to Chen style and learned from Feng ZhiQiang and others in Chen village at that time, as well as sort of palling around with Chen Xiaowang before he was famous, and meeting at some capacity with Chen Zhaokui. I learned from him for a number of years, and then he introduced me to Feng ZhiQiang, and I was studying Chinese at community college and then university, and I studied Chinese for about a year, and then I was going to take a trip to China, and he introduced me, sent me with a letter of introduction to go meet Feng ZhiQiang. And at this time, Chen Yu was battling cancer. And I went to Beijing and I met Feng ZhiQiang and gave him the letter from Jean. And Feng ZhiQiang was very excited because he hadn't seen him in a long time. And I remember Jean was like, if you can go give this to Feng ZhiQiang. He wrote a letter and the whole thing and had a gift, and give this to him. And, if you're lucky, he'd take a picture with you, And I gave him the stuff, and I met him, at his house, and he read it, and then he sat and talked with me for a few minutes, and then said, "So, do you want to learn?" And I was, shocked, and I said, "Oh, yeah, of course, yes." And so he offered to teach me, and I showed up at his class and started learning from him. I learned from him on and off for a few years. During that time, or after that time, I trained some Baguodang in Beijing, and then I was looking for Chen Yu because I had met him randomly, which I've discussed in some other interviews. met him. Well, it probably wasn't random, but I met him in the park in Beijing, which was incredible because I had been watching a video of his that some of the students of Chen FaKe gave me. So I met him, and I was trying to find my way back to him because I didn't have his contact, and then I eventually found him and started learning from him again in the early 2000s. And starting in earnest to learn from him after meeting him. And then I became 徒弟 of Chen Yu, and then that's it. I mean, kept going from there, right? That was 23 years ago, something like that. So I would say the whole journey's probably been 30 years, I would imagine. And in the line of Chen Yu in about, probably 23 years. And there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of foundational stuff all sort of mixed in there, and to build, something in finality. So I've been teaching for some amount of a decade and plus, and we've got some little outposts and branch schools, and a lot of not a lot, but we've got a number of students and 徒弟, and people are quite serious about it because it's very intense. We're not among martial arts, Taiji Chuan, even Chen Taiji Chuan, occupies the fringe of martial arts that allows the casual to join, right? Mm. If you want to learn an art like Hongga, right, or Southern arts, or strictly fighting arts that are nasty and mean and bitter and everything, there's a lot of those arts. Or maybe you want to do something like shuijiao or something like that. A lot of these arts, if you wanted to learn them, it's like they could say, "Oh, dip your foot in the water." Well, it's sort of like dipping your foot in a pool of acid. You can't really just dip your toes in there and be like, "Oh, that was nice." You kind of have to accept the whole situation. A lot of these martial arts, you don't really dip your foot in. You just jump in, and it's really hard. The real martial arts, the training is incredibly demanding. I always go back, if people don't understand, I go to Drunken Master and say, you're the guy who's practicing with a spike under your asshole. It wasn't low. Right. Yes. I mean, the movie is a comedy, but it's very realistic in terms of the attitudes between teachers and students and the attitudes about the training path. There was never anything that was supposed to be easy about it. It's bitter training. That's where all these sayings came from. 吃苦, eat bitter, and all that. Those aren't just little casual jokes. That's how the path is and was regarding all martial arts in China. It's just that for a number of reasons, Taiji Chuan, people look at it as, I don't really need to suffer the way they do in martial arts. With this one, I can take it easy. I can be casual. I can go on the weekends. I can practice the form with a group. And, I'm not too serious. I'm really not going to be that special at it, but this is good for my health, and it's fun, and I'll get a little martial arts and blah, blah, this kind of stuff. People take it very lightly, and it's gained this reputation probably due to Yang style Taiji's promotion as a health practice. And so people think these arts, these Taiji Chuan arts are light, easy, and they're welcoming to the casual student. And that social perception does not go unnoticed by the economies that are cultivated around them. So, yes, people who want to learn something like Taiji Chuan, if the collective consciousness is validating this casual approach, where anybody can join, and it's good for old people, and it's good for injured people, and it's good for people who are uncoordinated, or it's good for people who aren't that committed. if that's the collective consciousness, the people that are into it, it's sort of like social media personalities, whatever you put out there that gets received by the public, will validate for a lot of these people, the narcissistic personality types, whatever you put out there, however the public responds to it, will then validate the path that you choose to forge forward. So, in Taiji Chen, if you wanted to teach quote unquote Tai Chi, if this is what you're into, you found this thing, you trained in it for a while and you said, wow, this is what I want to do with my life. This is the most fun thing, and this is what I want to do. It's sort of like the people who become professional vegans. It's like, I found veganism. It's the answer to my life. Now, what am I going to do with myself? Well, of course, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to evangelically preach veganism to the masses. I'm going to fix everybody's life by telling them, only murder the vegetables. And they go, they make it their life's work to go preach veganism, or the people who work for, who go out are professional activists for PETA, right? The animal rights, animal cruelty organization. And, that's great. Everybody loves cats, and some people even eat them, but, they go out there and they get the cause of the day. And then they go out and their life's new mission is to preach the cause, right? The same thing for now. I digress, but it's the same thing for people who have a traumatic childhoods, and they go and they get therapy and they think therapy is the answer to their lives, and they get fully invested in therapy. And then what do? They preach therapy to all their friends. You need to get therapy. This has been the best thing for me. And then, you give them 3 to 5 years and they've trained and they become a therapist. And then what do? They go and they do therapy for their whole lives. So they went into therapy to heal themselves, and they come out of it being a therapist. And they're still not healed. But hey, they can preach to other people. And it's pretty common with a lot of trends and a lot of industries. And in Taiji Chen, it's the same. So if you were, bumbling around in your life and you went and you did yoga, you said, okay, yoga was cool, but it was too sweaty. Okay. You did, yoga was fine, but I had to wear the tight pants and I didn't like the look. Okay. So, and then you went, so I tried yoga. This was cool. And then I went, let me try, I'll try meditation. I tried meditation. Okay. That was cool. I'm not enlightened. Let me go look for something else. You started bumbling around. You tried veganism. You listened to what the idiot on the podcast said about veganism. You said, forget that. I'm not going to do it. And you bumbled into Taiji, right? And then you say, this is it. This is the lifesaver. This is the thing I've been looking for. This gives, fills the void in my life and gives me all the meaning I've been looking for. And now I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go sell it to the masses, right? I'm going to devote myself to it. I'm going to become a teacher, and I'm going to preach it out there, and I'm going to spread the good news to the masses. And you go do your Taiji thing, you start teaching it. And what do the masses want? The masses are casual about your Taiji. They say,
easy access. Yeah.
That's right. We love you. You're a Taiji teacher. Now, what are you going to get? The first thing when you open up you put your shingle out there and you start teaching Taiji, what do you get? You get a bunch of, 73-year-old,
old people. Yep.
Who are like, oh, I heard this is good. And then you get a bunch of old people coming in, right? After all, you get all the old people. Then you get all the physical therapy patients. You get all the people with injuries. I busted my ACL. I just had a hip replacement. This is an exercise I can do. You get the crippled and broken, and I'm coming to fix myself. Then below that, you get the middle age or pre-middle age, like, I'm tired, but I'm overweight. I need to lose weight. The doctor said I need to do something, And then you get the people who are like, hey, I used to love martial arts, so I kind of want to do this, Right. Below that, maybe if you're lucky, maybe you get the younger people, right? The fit people and the tough people, but generally speaking, once you've got the 3 layers or 4 layers of the old, the infirmed, the physical therapy, the whatever, the young people or the rough and tough people, they see that and like, I'm out. I'm not, this isn't the class for me. And so you end up with the demographic, which is, either elderly, crippled, broken, or tired, and that is the public persona of the art. And that will determine your path forward with the art. And that's a feedback loop where that forges your path forward. And then because that's your path, you revalidate that. It keeps on repopulating with the same situation. So it's sort of an easy access art that attracts a lot of casual people. People aren't too serious. And they're not really looking to work that hard. And the people that have formed an economic identity. Now, let me back up and say the people that have formed an identity around teaching the art inevitably that identity, you can, a lot of people will get into it when they're, maybe they're 25 years old, right? 23 to 27 years old. I found Taiji and they start training it by the time they're 26, 27, they're teaching, they're leading small groups. Well, that happens when you're young and you're idealistic and you don't necessarily understand about the greater world and the longer path. And you get into it thinking, okay, I'm really into this. I really want to do this thing. And then as you keep going, you're going to pass the age of 30. Eventually, you're going to pass the age of 40. And what started out as a sort of innocent identity is now an economic concern because you focused on that. And, now it's becoming your livelihood. So it's changing from something, I just really believe in this thing truly. I'm going to do this thing really pure. And then it's like, oh, geez, I better keep this thing going because I got to get paid. People have invested. You invested your 20s into it, maybe some part of your 30s, and now it's like, okay, I got to keep the bills paid, right? And at that point, we can call it an economic identity. You have to get paid, and you have to support this thing. It's like being a political activist when you're 22 years old. Check yourself out at 42 years old, and it's like, yeah, I don't know if it's the same type of idealism. Now it's like, okay, let's keep the doors open. Let's keep the flyers pumping out. You know what I mean? Whatever it is, people need to get paid for stuff past middle age. If they ever want to have a family or anything like that, you got to keep the bills paid. So once we get to that point, people have an economic identity that they need to preserve and support. And so then they become players and perpetrators of that social perception of what the thing is. So whatever the world tells you about what you're doing is what that becomes. You are not, an island where you can define. You can't say, no, it's this. You can do that. You can say, Taiji is this. And everybody says, we don't like that. So, okay, it's this. Okay, it's this. It's whatever you say it is. It's whatever keeps the bills paid. And that's just the way things are. So the great perception is Taiji is this thing. It's this casual thing. And it's a gentle thing. It's a welcoming thing. It's an easy thing. And it's a thing that can heal you. And so people like that and they self-revalidate that and they chase that. I don't do that. And I never have done that. So you've got I'm not saying I'm the only person. I'm just saying I'm not here to talk about anybody else. And if they want to, however they want to present themselves, they can, they will, and they have. And it's none of my business. But I'm saying I never got into it for those reasons. I did want to heal my body, but I was not old. I was 25, I think. I had repetitive strain injuries, postural strain injuries from playing musical instruments, but I wasn't looking for physical therapy. I was like, okay, this will help with that. But, I was like watching Kung Fu movies at the age of 10. So I just wanted to go, fight and, mix it up. And I liked the body art of it. I liked the actual martial art of it. I was into that stuff. So that was the reason I got into it. And over time, of course, my path also evolved. But by the time I got to Feng ZhiQiang and then Chenyu, I was so deeply into the hard knocks basics of it.
Yes.
And the experience, the training experience that I had in China, the social experience as well. So there's a physical, visceral experience, and then there's a social experience. And also, I at the time, I wouldn't say I was fluent in Chinese, but I was proficient. And I was very immersed in Chinese culture in that as associated with martial arts. And the experiences that I had over there, I was, when I moved back to the States, and I was still going back to China, I was still traveling, but when I moved my residence back to the States, I was like, okay, I need to keep this going, this experience, the social and community and training experience that I had in China. I was like, I need to preserve this and build it here so that I can live it. My students and training partners can live it. And there was absolutely nothing about that experience that was casual, light, or particularly forgiving in any way. It was just a hard knocks experience. And that's what I was going to preserve when I came back. And so my little school, of which is still little, is still very firmly planted in this isn't what the collective consciousness tells me it is. It's what the lineage and the experience tells me it is. And that's what
That's good.
present. I'm not going in any other direction. So that's what we've done. And as a result, we just don't have many casual students. Everybody's just, eating the bitter and, fighting the hard fight. It's a tough training path. It's very hard, and it only attracts a certain set of people. And that is self-limiting. So as a result, the school is not very big. Now, did I go off the tangent here? I might have. I'll hand it over to you. Did I introduce all enough? I don't know.
It's fantastic.
No,
As a matter of fact,
yeah.
it set us up for all the questions. And Marin, let me ask you. You had done another great interview. I can't remember if it was with Byron Jacobs or someone else, but you talked about when you first met your teacher Jean. You kind of really threw yourself into that bitter end, which you just talked about. You liked doing the bitter work. Do you think that kind of falling in love with that bitter hard work prepared you for meeting Master Feng and then later Master Chen Yu? Were there big adjustments with each of those teachers to the Tai Chi that you had previously learned with Jean, or was it a full reboot every time you worked with each of those gentlemen?
So first of all, let me clarify. Although I am very into bitter training, I would have to say in the balance, training with Chen Jinhong, Jean Chen, I would not say that was really all that bitter. So I can say I eased into this situation. I think I would have preferred, if looking back, it would have been nice if I didn't ease into it. If I went all the way in right away, it would have been great. But that's just the way it was. Jean had done bitter training and everything, but he was teaching in San Francisco, and the majority of his students were middle-aged Americans with some of the Chinatown community, Cantonese community as well. And these middle-aged Americans, Black Americans, white Americans, and then Chinese Americans, and then Chinatown folks, some of these guys were just like, torn up ex-football players. They were, college football guys who destroyed their knees and stuff. And so, to some degree, I remember, I was 25 and some of these guys were like 45 and 50, and their knees were messed up, and they really had beaten themselves up with college football. And, it was like, I really wanted to go for it. I was young, and I was just really, I was like, I'm ready to do anything, but some of these guys couldn't. And Gene was like, he had done all the bitter training, but he also was like trying to make a living. So he would, how could I say, cushion it or pad it such that he didn't want to be too demanding on his student base, because he had the idea that they couldn't do it. He was, his family was from Shanghai, and he had grown up, they had moved to Hong Kong after the revolution. And but he was culturally very Chinese. He wasn't a Chinese American. He was Chinese. And so he's very strict and kind of harsh, mean even. But in terms of his students, he sort of would talk in two directions and say like, okay, this is the real way that they used to do it. This is the bitter way. And he would describe whatever it is he was talking about. This is the difficult way. This is the bitter way. It's very harsh and all this. And he'd say, but we don't need to do that. We're not trying to go, be bodyguards. We're all doing this casually. So we don't need to, kill ourselves over this. This is for kids, right? Like this is for kids in the old days, or people who are trying to become warriors. And, we're all just trying to do this for our health. And he knew what side his bread was buttered on. And it was like, if he laid it out too heavy and said, here's the real way to do it, let's see if you can measure up. You're going to get half the students who just really can't do it. And then the problem is the more you do that, I know it took me some decades, and I began to understand this type of thing, that I'm a little bit of a slow learner, but you learn to, you understand that if too many of your students, if they feel like they can't do something, they become discouraged, and then eventually they're going to peel off, and you'll stop getting paid. And I think he was concerned about that. He didn't want to set a standard. He didn't want to set a bar that was so far above people that they couldn't do it, and then they would sort of become discouraged, and he wouldn't have the money and the community that he liked. So he lowered the bar for people and sort of said, it's like this, but we don't need to do that. And and the thing is, after being around Gene for a number of years, if you were smart enough, and also because I was involved in studying Chinese language and everything, and I was just young and impressionable. I was quite naive at the time. So being naive has its problems, but it also opens you. You are fortunately or unfortunately vulnerable to manipulation and indoctrination of all kinds when you're naive. And so I was sort of open. So I really absorbed from Gene, like cultural stuff and attitudes and all kind of ideas. And then I could sort that out later. But I learned to understand, as did some others. I'm not the only person, but I learned to understand that Gene liked to say things in reverse. He liked to teach in reverse. And so he would tell you, here's the way it's done, but this is too hard, or this is only for kids. Don't do this. It's not for you. And what that meant was, if you want to do something real, do this. Right. He would tell you, don't do it. It's not for you. And it meant, this is the one. Like, it wasn't like, here's my art. It was like, steal my art. The art was like, it's here, but you have to steal it. You can't, I'm not going to give it to you. We're just going to see if you are ambitious enough and clever enough to figure this out. Otherwise, tough shit. If you're too stupid, too naive, too ignorant, arrogant, or culturally limited, you will never understand what I'm saying, and you will never get it, and that's not my problem. That's the way he saw it. It was like, that's not my problem, because his generation, he was older. He's older than Chen Yu, younger than Feng ZhiQiang, but older than Chen Yu. And his generation, in martial arts, this is long before the internet or any of that. And his generation looks at it like all the teachers that he went around to learn from, he had to bribe them. This was not like he went around to people and said, hi, I'm so-and-so. I would like to learn from you. And they said, okay, I will teach you. Yeah. And it's not like that. From the beginning, and it isn't like that. It wasn't like that in China in the old days anyway. When he first started training, his mother went to the Zhiqia school, right? The Southern Mantis school, and to the teacher and said, please take my son. And the teacher was like, get out of here. I don't know you. Get out. And, depending on how much people understand about Chinese culture, and I think it's true in the North as well as the South, they're probably the same. The North for sure, the South I think is the same. But Chinese culture is a sort of a clan culture where blood and family mean everything. Yep. And outside the gates of blood and family, you can go die in the street. Nobody cares. I mean, I don't know you. You're not blood. I don't know you. I don't have guanxi with you. Right? If I don't have guanxi, a relationship that is essentially woven together by bribes, okay, by favors. If I have a relationship of guanxi with you, okay, we are connected. If we went to school together when we were young, we are 同学, we are connected. Outside of those things, or colleagues at work, maybe we're connected. Outside of those things, if you're not blood, if you get hit by a car in the street, I'm watching. I'm watching. When the ambulances come, I'm watching. Maybe I'll film with my phone. I got nothing to do with you if you're not my blood or my relation through guanxi. So that's just the way the culture is. They are averse to strangers. They got nothing to do with them. There's too many people in China to be concerned about, everybody you meet. So she went to the teacher and said, please take my son. And he's like, you're no one to me. I don't know you. Who are you? You're some lady. And then she came back next week with like a whole, like 2 roast chickens and all this kind of stuff and said, please take my son. He said, okay. It's like, hey, but the best way to gongfu is through the master's stomach. Okay. So she probably gave him money too, for all I know, right? I wasn't there, but
Sure.
that was the story. Probably gave him a bunch of gifts, made some bribes, and, he took her son to teach. And that's the way things go. All right. So how did I get onto this? Help me out here. Okay. So
we were talking about,
I found it.
Go ahead.
I found it. So yeah, you're going to have to rein me back in here and there. So nothing was freely given, okay? And then when he went to China to train, each teacher that he went to, I don't know the stories of every one of them individually, but I'm sure they all had to be bribed and massaged and, everything had to be greased, right? That's just the way it works, or the way it did work in China. I don't know the way it works. Maybe things are changing, but that's the way it worked. That's the way it worked when I was in China, okay? It's just a lot of Westerners don't understand that. So when they go to China, they don't understand the culture. So they can't find their way through any doors because they're too moral by Western standards. So they cannot get through any gates. All right. And so they end up getting access to the easy access teachers who don't have gates. Those are the teachers who have no standing. The teachers you don't need to bribe, the teachers you don't need to, cajole and grease the wheels. Those are the teachers who don't have any standing. Of course you don't need to bribe them because they have no status. So the people that don't understand is those teachers that are easy to find in China, they're bribing you. You see what I mean? If you're a Westerner and you go over there and now I'm going to piss people off with this, but I'm okay with that. I live a life of pissing people off, including myself. We all live with that. So if you're a Westerner, like a neophyte or whatever, and you go to China and you're looking for particular art and you don't really have guanxi, you don't have connections, and you're looking for people, if you find that guy in the park, which let me just say obliquely that there's a number of people who since maybe the year 2000 became famous because some guy found them in the park in Beijing or wherever. Okay. You found some guy at the park or in the courtyard of some place, whatever, and they were doing whatever art and, you met them, or even somebody recommended them to you and you found them out there in the park and they accepted you easily. Oh yes, of course. You want to learn? Sure. Great. I'll teach you. They weren't super expensive and they accepted you easily and all that. They were bribing you. You are at that time, even before social media was big like it is now, what's going on is that you yourself are social media. You are social media as a foreigner. You go over there. If you're going to learn from them, they know that you are the media that is going to present them to the West or even the East. As soon as you advertise, I'm learning from this person, and you make that little website or that Instagram spot, suddenly everybody in the West, they see that spot. And you as a person, you are human advertising. You are human advertising capital for that person who wants to get famous. So when you go, this is like, they have a thing with musicians ever since the 1990s when the music industry started to kind of crumble in a certain way. And I guess they had it going back in various forms all the way into the 1940s and 50s. They used to call it payola, where you would have to pay radio stations to play your music. If you were nobody, your agent pay the radio station to play your music. And if it got played enough, maybe you would get famous, right? But until then, they're all getting rich off. You're just paying them, okay? Right. And that's like the reverse economy. Well, this is the same thing. It's payola for martial arts. When you go over there and you say, I'm going to learn, can I learn from you? I'm going to give you money. I'm going to pay you. Can I learn from you? And they act like, oh, yes, thank you. I'm making money off you. This is so great. It's not that at all. You're actually paying to be an advertisement for them. There is no, in many cases, there's zero or negative benefit for you to be learning from them because they're going to teach you wrong because they have no standard and they are not accepted or acknowledged by any lineage because they're nobody. Okay? The situation in China used to be very controlled socially with who could come out and represent any line. They had quality control. They didn't want, these lackluster bullshitters coming out to represent the lineage. So they would not acknowledge you, right? If you're not a tudi, you're not a disciple of somebody, you're not acknowledged, you have no standing and you can't teach. You wouldn't teach and you couldn't teach because somebody from the actual line would come kick your ass, or they would flay you, like humiliate you socially in front of the whole city or whatever. Somehow it would come out, People didn't like that. They didn't like having low quality crap around them. It did exist, I'm sure, but it was a little bit different than it is now. So in this case, you go to learn from that person. They accept you easily and you pay them and you're paying to do the work. You're paying them so you can do the work and advertise them. And they're teaching you wrong for the most part. Mm-hmm. Or even if it's not wrong, it's very poor quality. And that's not a small matter. If someone teaches you not only wrong, if they teach you just poorly, or kind of messed up, that stays with you for your whole life. It's very hard to get right after you learned wrong. It's much harder to fix later. So what's really going on is they're making money off of you in terms of advertising, because as soon as you hit the internet with their name, they get more students. And it's happened to it. There's a number of famous names out there that I won't mention today. And they're out there. They're famous. They're making money because of that one or two guys who went over there and said, oh my God, I found somebody. Somebody was willing to take me. After that, they're getting lots of students, right? And then eventually they're like, oh, no. Now I'm not going to teach. Now I'm going to be standoffish. And they become Mr. Important. But in the beginning of the day, they're just accepting the bribes like, okay, who's going to advertise for me? And they take that person. Now, the real deal is if you go find the serious people with the lineage and all that, who have status in China, and you want to go learn from them, and you say, please, will you teach me? They don't say, oh, yeah, I need students. They don't do that. They say, nah. Who are you looking for? Okay, and that's how it is when I was with Feng ZhiQiang. Feng ZhiQiang and Chen Yu were the same way when I was with them. And you know what the silly part is? Chen Chen, he also used to do that. People would come and find him in the park. If someone had told him about the class, they would come and drop by the class when the class was in session and say, I'm looking for Chen, and he would say, he's over there somewhere, he's not here today. he didn't like the look of the guy. He just say, oh yeah, he's not here today. Go talk to one of the students, and or he would send the disciples out to, block the guy and just be, oh no, he's not here. Gene's not here. When I went to Feng ZhiQiang, I was with him in the park and I was learning from him. I was learning from his disciples as well. And one day in the park, somebody came and randomly bumbled into the class and said, I'm looking for, he walked right up to Feng ZhiQiang. He's like, I'm looking for, Feng Laoshi, Feng ZhiQiang. And Feng ZhiQiang had a great way of looking really stupid. He could do that. He could put that on. He would give this look, who suddenly looked like an old person who was like, disoriented. Like someone who'd been drinking, and he's like, what? Who? And I'm looking for Feng Laoshi. He goes, huh? Who's that? He goes, is that you? You look like him. He said, who? Feng who? Right? Who's this you're looking for? He said, oh no, I think you came to the wrong class. I think he's over on that end of the park. I think, yeah, you go that way, but maybe he's like, 3 blocks over in the park. And he didn't know the guy. He didn't want to talk to him. He didn't want anything. He was busy. I don't have anything to do with you. I don't know you. And the guy would go. Later, when I was with Chen Yu, we would do, we had private classes at the apartment, in the courtyard, in the elevator hallway. And then on the weekends, we do classes in the park, the public classes. And the public class, the public students would come to that class. And somebody bumbled into the class and said, are you Chen Yu? I'm looking for Chen Yu. And Chen Yu is like, it's like, it puts this cigarette down and like drops his head, very confused, looks at Chen who? What? Like really, and kind of aggressive, who? Chen who? Who are you looking for? And he goes, Chen Yu. He goes, there's no Chen Yu here. There's no Chen Yu here. And then he says, oh, that's Chen Yu over there. He points to the class, one class over some other group. The guy wanders over Chen Yu. He's like,
Oh my gosh, that's great.
They all did that.
That is amazing.
And then the second guy, I remember there was one guy who bumbled in there and said he's looking for Chen Yu, and he like kind of yelled at them to scare them. He's like, there's no Chen Yu here. Who are you looking for? We're running a class. He goes, well, I was friends with Chen Yu's father. I learned, and he goes, oh, and then he mentioned his dad, apart from his dad, and then he came in, and then he became known as, Li Shibo. Uncle Lee, and he was around for a long time. But most people, they just push him off. They don't want anything to do, until the class got really huge, and then it was like people could bumble in and say, "Oh, here's a student. Go talk to this disciple," and he wouldn't have to deal with them at all. But generally speaking, the people with status, their door is not open. If they're already established and they have actual status, they're not going to teach you because they don't know you, and they don't know what kind of baggage you're bringing. And there's a lot of it's not scam. It's just there's just a lot of sort of malfeasance in that scene. There's a lot of bad characters too, and there was another school that would have classes in the park not far away, and that teacher was some type of grifter. He did not have status, and he later became famous. He's one that I'm mentioning. He had no status, and all the teachers he learned from disavowed him. So he had no lineage. So he had allegedly met a number of teachers and learned something from them. Everybody disavowed him, which means there's something wrong with him. He had bad character, or he was bad at what he did, or he crossed people in a bad way. And that guy was trying to get famous, and he used to routinely send students to other classes to say, "Oh, I'm looking for so and so," and they were lying. They would say, "I have no experience. Please teach me." They were trying to get in to cause some kind of loss of face, to hurt somebody or something like that. And they did that to me. I remember there was a week where I was at class at the park on the weekend, and I stayed after, and or maybe I had gone on a different day, and I was practicing in the park by myself. And one of these guys came over and said, "Oh, I'm looking for, Master Chen Yu's class, and maybe you're one of his students." Maybe they'd seen me. They probably scoped the joint, and maybe you're one of his students. I just want to learn. Can we do some Tui show, And I kind of recognized, what was going on, and I think I knew whose student he was, and I was like, no, that's okay, because what they really want is to come over and do Tui show and say they don't know anything, and then you do a little Tui show, and then they break your tooth. And then they say, "I beat Chen Yu's disciple," That's the game. That's always the game. So teachers become savvy about that, and they close the gate, and it's not easy to get to them. So generally speaking, all right, there's that paradigm. I probably long-windedly spent too much time on that, but I don't know what your time limit here for this interview is, so I just kind of go. But getting with that in mind, getting back on track. So you were asking me about eating bitter with the various teachers, and whether I started from scratch with each one. So, how did I get onto the one about teachers with their gates? Let me see if I can figure out. I must have had a reason for going there. Well, okay, now I know. So, what it was that in the 70s and 80s, when Gene Chen was going around, he was like researching and trying to dig up all this stuff. He went around to every one of the living students, the living disciples of Chen FaKe, to learn from each one of them, so he could compare and contrast their interpretation or understanding of Chen FaKe's art. He wanted to practice Chen FaKe's art. So even though he became a disciple of Feng ZhiQiang, his form did not look like Feng ZhiQiang, because he considered Feng ZhiQiang was kind of doing his own thing. So he wanted to learn techniques and methods from Feng ZhiQiang. But in terms of the style of practice and the frame, he wanted to stick close to Chen FaKe's approach. So he went to everybody. He went to Feng ZhiQiang. He went to Lei Muni, who's a disciple of Chen FaKe. He went to Tianshou Chen, who's a disciple of Chen FaKe. He went to Hong Junsheng, who was a student or disciple of Chen FaKe, I don't know. And he went around all these people and tried to get what he could to sort of piece the thing together as a standard so he could understand it. And then he was going around to all these Wu-style people and these Yang-style people. And in his journeys, each one of these people that he went to was like the story of his mom having to bring gifts to the Zhuge Tanglang teacher. And he had to pay large amounts of money to each one of these teachers. He was bribing them with money. He was taking them out to dinner. He was probably going out drinking. He was doing interviews. He was promoting them. It was just bribe. Guanxi. Okay. That's how it works. Relationship. Okay. So he was creating relationships by greasing the wheels and doing a lot of favors and giving a lot of money. And there was a lot of people who he went to where the gate was closed, and he waited outside the gate. and banged on the gate and waited outside the gate. And that's what you do. You go stand outside the gate in the rain until they take pity on you and take you in. The master's wife says, oh, okay, let the poor, after 3 months, let him in, then he becomes a servant, in the old days. That's like the story of Yalu-chan, right? He sneak peeked of the practice, and then they're ready to kill him because he sneak peeked the practice, and then they say, okay, let's see what you got. And he practiced a little bit. Okay, maybe this guy's worth teaching. But that probably didn't happen in the course of a day. It probably happened in the course of 3-4 months, where they're going to make you pay your dues and wait outside the gate. And there's a whole paradigm about that in the wuxia movies, the martial arts movies. That paradigm is not false. It is not storytelling. That is real. And so when Gene went around to all these people, he was having to really, just really eat the humiliation in front of all these people and, pay a lot and take a lot of abuse just to get through the gate. And then, a lot of the people he learned from were quite old by the time he learned from them. And the stuff that they knew, was, as Gene put it, secrets they would take to the grave. So the tricks of the trade, the special methods, the science of tuishou, the science of sanshou, and striking methods and tina joint lock methods, all this kind of throwing methods, these complexities of the art were taught little by little, right? If you keep them happy. And, you bribe your way through the gate and you keep these teachers happy and you gain their trust, and then they will start to teach you the secrets. And the secrets doesn't mean it's a secret like a magical ability. It's just a secret like they're not teaching it to the general public. They might not be teaching it to anybody. And these are the little things that make things work, or special ways of understanding. Here's the application for this particular move that, nobody, it's hidden. It's hidden in the practice, and you can't see it until somebody pulls the veil back, and then you can understand it. So he was able to learn a lot of that stuff from people by, greasing the wheels and ingratiating himself and making friends and becoming a trusted ally and paying a lot of money. Even then, these old folks, some of these guys, remember that 1980 is just coming out of Cultural Revolution. And so these guys were not allowed to teach, and some of them really suffered through Cultural Revolution. And you're coming up on 1979, 1980, 1981, and these people have been for a decade unable to teach. Maybe some of them were starving, maybe some of them have been sent down to the countryside or maybe in labor camp. I have no idea the stuff that people went through. And then a guy shows up and says, oh, I heard you're part of this lineage. Please teach me. And the guy's been in hiding, and then they're like, okay, this is good. I'm going to get some money. And now I'm going to start to practice again. Thank God I can do something. But they're not feeling like, singing a song. They're not like fancy free and like, oh, great, it's party time. They're like, they're still cowering. So the stories that Gene told from back at that time period were basically, he said when he went to Chen Village early on, Chen Village was closed. It was a closed economic zone and nobody was allowed in. You weren't allowed into Chen Village unless you had official papers to be there, which meant you had maybe some economic reason to be there. You have business, but nobody has business as a farming village. Or you have some family reason to go there because it was like a closed, what they call danwei, like a communist work zone. And it was closed to the outside for whatever reason. And the story he told was that he had made friends with Chen Xiaowang. And Chen Xiaowang was not famous yet. And Chen Xiaowang helped him to arrange papers to say that he was a Chen family member. And that's how he got into Chen Village. So he got in there. And one of the people that he learned from, I don't know the name of the guy because he wouldn't reveal the name. Okay? Because the guy, he lived in some house on whatever side of the village, and that guy's family had been blacklisted by the government for being politically incorrect. So he had been suppressed for years because something went wrong and they were blacklisted. And so as a result, Gene would not reveal his name because, it just wasn't the right thing to do. And he learned from this guy in secret. Like they wouldn't, he tried to get into his compound or his house without being seen. He didn't publicize that he was learning from him. But, it was some special type of lineage, special type of instruction. I don't know the guy, and I'm not creating secrets because I don't need to Gene learned other stuff from other people, but this was just one of his stories, was that there were people there who had been blacklisted, come out of the Cultural Revolution not doing very well, and he learned from those people. And then he said that, at the time, and we have these old pictures of him in China with the disciples of Chen FaKe, and he's wearing the blue Mao suit, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And the hat with the red star. And he said, you had to wear that. In 1980, 1981, Mao Zedong had just died. And if you're not dressed appropriately, if you're not looking properly, proletariat, you're not looking properly communist, you're going to have some real problems. And the way he described it was, you're in Chen Village or you're in wherever it is, and the sun is shining, the birds are chirping, and you're having a happy day because you're going to go train some great gongfu with somebody. So you're walking down the street and you start whistling to yourself. You're immediately in labor camp because Mao Zedong just died, and why are you happy and singing? You're coming out of a culture. You're coming out of a culture where children were ratting out their parents, right?
Yeah,
and the parents were getting sent to labor camp and killed. So you're walking down the street whistling 3 months after Mao Zedong died. You're going to labor camp too, honey. So he said you had to try to make some tears come out of your eye when you're walking around. And that was the scene. Okay. Look sad. Don't look happy. Communist enough, be appropriate. Okay. And keep some of the stuff you're learning. You're going to keep it hidden. And so some of these teachers that you're learning from have been suppressed. And they're not going to, you can't show people you're coming out with a bunch of money, right? Or if those teachers, there was a story, about, a teacher who became famous, who is still alive, named, who called himself Bruce Francis. Okay. And he was big sometime in the 1990s. And the reason he became big is because he went to Taiwan. He learned from some people in Taiwan, and some of them kicked his ass out. And then he went to mainland China. He met Feng ZhiQiang, right? And that was a big deal. And he went and learned from Feng ZhiQiang. Well, it's been long enough. I can tell a little bit of this story now, because what happened was Gene was one of the few people in the United States who was in contact with Feng ZhiQiang. He was his first disciple. And what happened is when apparently, I don't know the absolute facts, but when Bruce Francis went to China and looked for somebody to learn from, he ended up going to Feng ZhiQiang, but Feng ZhiQiang was associated with the government because Feng ZhiQiang and Chen Xiaowang were the two guys who they had sort of recruited, because Feng ZhiQiang was a rough and tough disciple of Chen FaKe, and Chen Zhaokui was an up-and-coming, performance great, right? Who was doing great form performances. These two guys became associated with the Beijing Wushu team that was touring the world to present Chinese martial arts to the public, and that included Jet Li. Okay, So wow, and they sort of designated Feng ZhiQiang was said to be the bodyguard for that team. So they were associated with that team, and they were part of the government apparatus. And this isn't an elective choice. So if the government says you are going to do this, you're like, I'm going to do this.
Okay.
And so when they brought in foreign dignitaries or foreign people, because at that time China was not very open, right? So if you went to China in the early 80s, you were looked upon with suspicion as being a capitalist roader, as they would call it, right? So if somebody, some martial artist like Bruce Francis went to China in the 80s and hooked up with Feng ZhiQiang, that's because the government sent him to. You can learn from this guy. You can't go around and find whoever you want. You can't even go wherever you want,
Right.
It was just not open like that. So if he found Feng ZhiQiang, it's because the government sent him that way. They said, the door is open for this guy. Okay. He went to Feng ZhiQiang and said, "Oh, I heard about you. You're great." And the quote was, I thought I was swimming in the ocean of martial arts, but it was really just a little pond, and you're the great ocean. One of these type of statements. And then offered him a wad of money, US dollars, thousands of dollars. Okay. That's when the phone call came to Gene Chen. The anxious phone call said, "This guy just showed up. He just offered me all this money. Who is him? He says he's famous in the US. Do you know him?" Now, Gene did know who he was. But he said, "I don't know. I don't know him. Watch out." Because the problem is, You find one of these guys in Beijing in the early 80s who's associated with the government, and you give him a few $1,000s, and suddenly that person's in labor camp. Because they took thousands of dollars from a Western capitalist. You know what I mean? It's like,
sure,
yeah,
right.
That's just the way.
Kind of a setup.
That's the way things were. It wasn't Taiwan. It was different. So that became that was like a flashpoint where Feng was like, worried and called Gene, and Gene was like, watch out for this guy. I think I've heard him, but be careful. And that was the times. So that anyway, I don't know how I got into that one. I get lost all the time, but the point is the people Gene went around to were not giving anything out freely, and he was not at liberty to say, like, here's a huge amount of money. You see what I'm saying? Right. That's why. The same reason. Feng ZhiQiang was even better placed. You could offer him a huge amount of money, and by their standards, it was a huge amount of money. You could offer him a wad of cash at that point, and he could get worried about it, okay? But because he was supposed to be teaching that foreigner, at least he wasn't in the worst of trouble. But for somebody else who, according to their own perception of their lives, they're scared about teaching anybody. They haven't been, allowed by the government to do anything. They're not associated with the government. They're not protected by the government. So they are just random people who've been practicing all their lives, but they were suppressed during Cultural Revolution. And then somebody shows up and offers them money. It's like, whoa, is this person a spy? And if I take this money, who's watching me take it? And once I take it, who's coming after me for associating with capitalists? Yeah, go ahead.
Right.
Do you have something?
Marin, I was listening to all of this, and a thought popped in my head, and it was actually how you first introduced how Tai Chi is kind of seen here in the West, and then listening to some of these stories. What popped in my head was thinking, the casual learner versus these people were willing to die for their art. Is that
be correct? Yes, that would be correct. You're talking about people that had practiced all of their lives, and they're probably in their 60s, aging students of whoever. They practiced all their lives, and for, and I know this from my own experience, the Chinese life path and the Chinese lifestyle during those times, and even when I was in China, life in China, right? It's a huge population of people. Okay. It's by our standards overpopulated. It's very, very crowded everywhere you go in Beijing. And it's a very competitive society. And Chinese families have their views on economics and survival, and they have their priorities in terms of how they live their lives. That's why Chinese tend to be very frugal, right? They save their money rather than just splash it all around. They're extremely concerned with their offspring being well situated financially. And they're very concerned with money in general. But they don't tend to, at least in the past, they didn't flaunt it as much. Now it's a little bit different. There's a lot of wealth there now. But people, it's just been the thousands of years of history, thousands of years of a history of austerity and suffering, right? Natural disasters, endless wars, famines, it was tough. A lot of, survival was the toughest ever. And, my wife is Chinese, so my family is involved. My family's half Chinese. So, and her relatives, you look back and they lost a lot of children. It's not the same as it was in the United States for the past few hundred years. China is a history of misery and hard survival. Okay. So, back in the day, before the 1980s and before the 1990s, martial arts in China was never anything glamorous. I'm not gonna speak about Hong Kong for the moment, but mainland China, and especially in the north, martial arts, central to north, martial arts was not a high class pursuit. And I could say it wasn't a high class profession, but mostly it wasn't a profession at all. Martial arts could become a profession if you were a soldier or a bodyguard. Okay. But to say I'm a professional martial arts teacher, it's like, nah, not really. You could be teaching, but that's probably not the main way you made your living, because there wasn't enough money to go around among the people that wanted to do it. It was not, it became a rich person's pursuit later on. But in the formative years of, martial arts history in China, that was for the poor people, the working class, and the ruffians. People that didn't have an easy way forward in life. So maybe they're going to do martial arts and then become thieves, right? Or going to become soldiers or bodyguards. Any profession where you're risking your life and you might get impaled by a spear is probably not the upper class. They tend to shy away from the bloody organ damage as a career choice. So martial arts was a working class or lower pursuit, and martial arts and martial artists, in plural, were considered by society to be low class and looked down upon. So they have that distinction between Wen and Wu in Chinese. Wen is literate, Wu is martial, right? And the literate is high class, and that's what everybody wanted their kids to do. They would have had to, but people could not do it. They would have had to spend a lot of money to pay for tutors for their children to be able to learn to memorize all these Confucian,
the classics.
All the classics.
Yeah.
They have to learn this stuff by rote and then go recite it, write it for the official exams. Then maybe they can become an administrator or some kind of, dynastic official, and they're going to be very wealthy. They could become an administrator. But those who couldn't, maybe they would do martial arts, and learn to become, soldiers. They can be the cannon fodder while the rich people sit behind the desk like anywhere else. Martial artists were not highly regarded. Now, great martial skill was always highly regarded because it's like in Chinese, it's a pillar of manhood. You're supposed to have both of these aspects where you're literate and you're like masculine and tough, but they say, I think they say great martial skill is a lot harder to get than the literate skill. But at the same time, it's looked down upon to whatever degree, and martial artists were considered ruffians. And that's why you have this idea of, all those martial arts stories that write about what they call jianghu, right? The water margin, the rivers and lakes, as they call it.
Yep.
That's because the swamp, the rivers and lakes, they're using that as an analogy for the border of civilized society. So you have civilized society, and then you have the rivers and lakes and the marshes where nobody wants to walk through that shit. And out there is the rejects of society, the outcasts, who are the killers, the thieves, the martial artists. Right? Whether or not they actually live outside the water margin, they live on the fringe of society according to the civilized people. So they probably live in hiding. People don't know that they have martial skill. But in any case, martial artists were not highly regarded in terms of social status. How did I get onto this one? I'm going to backtrack a little bit.
Life, the life casual path. Practitioner versus life path, and dying for it.
Right. So all these people that have been practicing and they're 60 years old and they've been practicing all their lives, they really love their martial arts. But what I'm trying to explain is that because survival was so difficult for any normal people in China, the thing you love is still like a partner or a secondary to the thing that makes you money. I mean, the same as a lot of people now, but it's just that all these people who they might have been really accomplished martial artists and really great, that was their passion. That was the thing they loved to do, but they had a whole other life. They have families, they have kids, and they have careers and jobs, which they have to do and have to work to make money and all this kind of stuff. So, they might be suppressed in terms of their practice, but you said like they're willing to die for this art. That's right. Because it's what I'm trying to say is that for a lot of these old folks of those older generations, gongfu is the only thing that is just theirs. Right? So you have your family obligations, right? You have your adherence to government, demands and all this kind of stuff. You have your economic demands. You must work, and the work could be very bitter, I think a lot of maybe a lot of younger people who don't understand this culture, they look at this wonderful martial arts fantasy and they think these guys just practice all the time and blah blah blah. And realistically, a lot of these guys who are really really good, they had jobs that were really demanding, and they probably weren't. They're not like working for AI. They're not like these are guys who, like Feng ZhiQiang was a machinist. And other people that, Chen Zhaokui, Chen Yu's father, he worked at the post office, I think. And then somewhere else, I can't remember, I might be wrong about that. But, they had office jobs, menial jobs, working class jobs. And in the Chinese economy and definitely in, the development of the communist time period, I mean, and before, if you had a job, I mean, you're lucky to have it. Because there's a lot of starving people. So whatever your job is, you are working yourself to the bone at the job. So the gongfu, if you're going to the job at 8 a.m, you're practicing gongfu at 5.
Right.
So they're just getting up crack of dawn, practicing gongfu, going to work, making food for the family. Then they're up at 12 at night practicing when nobody's watching. They're just stealing time to do this whenever they can. Meanwhile, eating the bitter at the job. So by the time you find them when they're 60 and they've been practicing all their lives, they have sacrificed all of their personal time to practice Kung Fu. And all of their other time is taken up by all of their other demands. Mm-hmm. There's not, unless you find one of the few people who's just born into wealth and they can just practice all the time. These people are working people. And that thing that this is their private thing they have lived for all their lives. The rest of their life is like obligation, obligation, eating the bitter, obligation, taking care of responsibilities, all this kind of stuff. And then they have this time that they carved out to chase this thing. And, I'll just say this. I'm going to get off track for 1 second and say that I have had a number of students come and go over the decades of teaching. And one of the common threads that we find from people is, I really like this training. But I just don't have time to do it. I got kids, I got a wife, I got my job, I got these vacations I got to take with the family, I got this and that, I got all these things, and I just don't have time to practice every day. And, when I hear that, I say, yeah, gee, you're right. That's it. But the truth is, you have your perspective and you have your priorities. And these people are American, European, and even some Chinese. You have your priorities. And your priorities is comfort. You have your job and you're tired. You have your obligations and they're demanding. And you need some me time. And what are you going to use that me time for? Watch movies? I don't know, whatever it is you're going to do, okay? All have our priorities. And me too. I'm no scion of perfection here either. But I'm just saying, you look at those old timers in the Chinese Kung Fu lineages. These guys got up at 4 or 5 in the morning. They had probably more obligations than you have. And they don't care. They don't care. They will make it happen because Kung Fu is everything to them. They will make it happen. They don't even have the bubble existing in their brain that allows for, I'm lazy, I'm tired, I can't do this. It doesn't exist for them.
Right.
Just simply doesn't exist. Some of that is part of the Chinese mindset. I mean, they have an eat bitter life over there, and their family instills in them from a young age that failure is not an option, and you work hard. Okay. They work really hard. Not all of them now, but I mean, it's in the culture. It's in the history of the culture. And, by the time you get to the 1960s and 70s in the United States, that attitude is fading out of the culture. We also had a work hard culture. We had a survival frontier culture that was a work hard culture, but that faded out. Once we got industrialized luxury, that faded out, and everybody needs to relax now. Everybody needs to have their me time. Everybody needs to be happy. They need to have their traumas must be dealt with. They're all the little, it's like it's a world of snowflakes over here. Okay. And I've been the snowflake too, but I'm just saying it's like everybody's special. Everybody needs special treatment. Nobody can be abused and exploited. And it's very hard. I get it. It's very hard for everybody. But the old timers in China, that doesn't exist for them. They don't give a shit. Their shifu, their teacher abused them routinely. That's the nature of the relationship. It's a relationship that is based on eating bitter and hard knocks abuse. If you can't take the abuse, you're not going to learn. That's part of eating bitter. They were not easy on the students. They didn't say, oh, I'm going to teach you the nice way to do it, and here's how it works. And, oh, that hurts, sorry. That's not part of it. Okay? Like, this is an old story, but Chen FaKe, this is one of my fun stories that, people like to promote the stories that Chen FaKe had great wude. People in the West are obsessed with wude. Martial virtue. What a wonderful person he was. He was so virtuous. They love to promote this, and Feng ZhiQiang promote this about him too. He was so virtuous, and people eat that stuff up. Okay, about how he beat this guy in a challenge, but he didn't show it to anybody. They both knew he won, so he just said fine, and he let go. And the guy said, "Thank you for not making me lose face." That's probably a true story too. But the other side of Chen FaKe is this guy had his gates open from dawn to dusk, saying anybody can come and have a shot in Beijing.
Yeah,
anybody can come and have a shot.
Yeah,
okay. Guys like that, who've been training since they were like 4, right? Who managed to dominate everybody in the village and the family, right? And became a headliner of the art itself in Beijing. Those guys, they don't care. They give no quarter. They are tough.
Yeah.
They are tough. Okay.
Yeah.
And so this guy, he might have been a paragon of wude. That might have been true. But at the same time, there are other stories. They're walking through the park or somewhere in Beijing, and somebody spotted them. Somebody came up who had been looking for him, who was a martial artist. I think he was said to be king of the spear or whatever it is, the spear dragon. God knows I don't know the guy's name, but it's an old story. They found him in the park. And he said, "Oh, you're this guy. You're Chen FaKe." He said, "I'm going to tear you apart. I'm going to knock you off your pedestal, right? I'm going to take you down. I've heard of you, and I'm going to take you out because I'm better than you." And everybody would have had Chen FaKe being all virtuous and everything like that. But the story that I heard was he said, "Really? Okay." And he reached into his pocket, pulled out a handful of coins, and like absolutely aggressively threw them on the stones in front of him. Okay? He says, "Okay, all right, fine." Takes out the coins, throws them onto the stones, and looks at him and says, "Whenever you're ready, those are for your medical bills."
Ooh.
Okay? So,
Wow.
Yeah, paragon of virtue, sure, but I'm going to maim you. And you're only worth 3 or 4 coins. Okay. So I'm very careful. I don't buy into things, and having met people in the family and the teachers that I trained from, I believe that 100%. I don't think Chen FaKe was like some magnanimous, like lovely, gentle, whatever, paragon of virtue. He was someone who destroyed people unless he didn't have to. There was another story, of Chen FaKe that's, let me turn this thing off. This is dinging. It is going to ding. Okay. There is another story. Which one is it? Right. So there is a student, right? So Chen FaKe is teaching classes, and my own view is that Chen FaKe had tiers of students, right? He had levels that he would teach in different ways for different reasons, and he taught his family quite likely very different than what he taught the public in the park or wherever he was teaching in the courtyard. And he was making money teaching. And so he had students who were some of those students were wealthy. And one of these students was some kind of a bureaucrat. And, he knew about the martial arts, but Chen FaKe wasn't displaying it openly, I think. And this guy came to him and said, "Master Chen, please teach me the martial arts aspect, right? As opposed to just form and qigong, that type of thing. Please teach me the martial aspect," which means tuisho and everything like that. And Chen FaKe is like, no. It's like, you're doing fine where you are. What you're learning is appropriate for you. Because this is like, remember, Chen FaKe is from the countryside. And these are Beijing, these are people. They are soft, And I mean, they're not farmers, you know what I mean? And so he said, "No, you're good where you are." And the guy kept bugging him and begging him, please teach me the martial. Eventually, Chen FaKe, I think he was annoyed. He had said what he'd said. He was teaching the guy what he thought was appropriate for him. The guy, it was not enough. The guy wanted more. Please teach me the martial aspect. And said, okay, today we start. And so he's going to teach you some tuisho, right? So they start and he goes, whatever he said, push or start this way or whatever. And Chen FaKe shook him and threw him, like 8 feet away. The guy landed. I think it was something like he broke his collarbone, dislocated his shoulder, broke his arm, broke his hip. He messed the guy up. Like he shattered him. Okay. This is a real story. He shattered. You have to understand the real story is the one people don't want to tell.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to create this image of this like Buddha, he shattered the guy and the guy spent like 3 months in the hospital and then came back to class all wrapped up in crutches, whatever, said, okay, thank you, master. I'm ready to learn the regular style, the non-martial style. I'm good.
Back to basics. Yeah.
Please take me back. So, I mean, I take everything with a grain of salt. I don't think that he was as people like to present him. And I have sort of anchor points to corroborate that in the sense that when I learned from Feng ZhiQiang, I asked him about Chen FaKe, and he said Chen FaKe's style was, this is quoting, was big and beautiful. It was expansive, big and beautiful. But I slowed it down to teach it to the public. So he's basically saying that Chen FaKe was like cracking fast, like it wasn't easily accessible. Do you understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And it's like, anyway, when just for context, when Jean Chen was in the 80s learning from Feng ZhiQiang, his students would pick him up from the airport when he came back from China. And they said every time they picked him up at the airport, his face was black. Because Feng ZhiQiang had thrown him on his face. So that's the way it was. Okay.
Yeah.
What Feng ZhiQiang got, he is repeating the style from Chen FaKe. You understand?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
Now we got on this talking about the various starting over with the various teachers, right? Mm-hmm. That type of thing. And I was talking about what to get here. Oh, right. People willing to die from the art was where we started. So these old folks who had been suppressed, this art is what they lived for. It was their private passion. And
yes.
Most of these people have been exposed to charlatans coming around and saying that, they have a lineage and they have and there's a lot of bullshitters out there even back then. And once you've seen enough of that, and if you have sacrificed a lot for your art for 50 years, you stop being willing to give it away to anybody. Because it's like throwing pearls before swine. People won't respect what you teach them. So you wait for the right students, who will either give you enough, right? A lot of money or a lot of bribe, or they'll take care of you, or they will represent you, or they will learn your entire style. You know what I mean? Somebody, give me the tricks, give me the things, you don't teach those people. So a lot of these people would take their secrets to the grave, as Jean Chen put it. So he would build relationships so he could learn that stuff. But some of them he would get annoyed because they wouldn't teach any further because they're just like, nope, I'm going to die with that stuff. I'm not giving it to anybody because it was too hard won. You have to think back to what did these old folks have to sacrifice to learn that. So they're not giving it away. They're not giving it away at all, and they're not even selling it easily. So yeah, they're willing to die for a lot of that stuff, and it's not handed out easily. Now, how do we get onto that? So I'm not sure, but I'm just going to backtrack to your question, okay, and say that when I learned from Jean Chen, he had a lot of application methods and secrets and all this kind of stuff, which was really great stuff. But I would not say in the area of eating bitter that he was all that intense because like I said, he had lowered the bar for his student body because he felt that they couldn't do it. And by doing that, he was a self-fulfilling prophecy where he created that was the standard. If you say the students can't do it, they say, yeah, we can't do it. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And you say, we don't need to do it. They say, yeah, we don't need to do it. It's basically like, these are not the droids you're looking for, and it works.
Right.
Okay? So he created that standard, and people adhered to that standard. My problem is I was young and stupid, and I didn't adhere to that standard. So I just went nuts. So when I figured out what he was talking about, that he was talking in reverse, whatever he said not to do was what I went to do. But he knew what he was doing. He knew me very well. So he would speak out of this side of his mouth and say, oh, you shouldn't do this, while he's looking at these guys. And then he'd kind of, be sort of looking at the side of his face over at me and knew what I was going to do. And I went and did that. But even then, he didn't have let's say, the science or the architectural blueprint for how to really eat bitter with the practice. Because, maybe he hadn't spent enough time, let's put it this way. Feng ZhiQiang was a great martial artist, but I can't say that Feng ZhiQiang was a great teacher. These are two different things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Feng ZhiQiang he was really great. His martial arts was really great. And I think he was a really excellent person. But as a teacher, and I don't mean to say that he was a bad teacher. I think he was probably a very generous teacher. I'm talking about something else. I'm not saying it's not about like your willingness to teach. It's about what is the arrangement? What is your syllabus? What is your curriculum? And what is the path? I don't think he was a great teacher in that regard. And that is common for a huge number of great martial artists. In fact, the best martial artists are usually not great teachers. And that is because they're so obsessed with their own practice that they haven't even taken the time, or they don't have the time to try to arrange it. And part of the problem is this is what you guys were talking about before you so graciously noticed that I was on the call. I'm just teasing. You guys were talking about this, which is to say that however it is that you learned, like you're saying, if you don't remember how you learned, or if you don't teach students the same way that you learned, you don't have a repeatable result, right? So this is a pet peeve of mine. It's a long-standing thing. But Feng ZhiQiang, for example, we don't really know how he learned, but he already said he learned from Chen FaKe, but it was, Chen FaKe was faster. And so he changed, he slowed it down. And then later, for a number of reasons, right, he started his Hunyuan Taiji thing, and he changed the size of his circles and changed the approach of how he taught. So it looks very different from the Chen family Taiji Chuan, right?
Yeah.
So we know he made changes. We don't really know how he actually learned. What did it look like when he learned? How did Chen FaKe teach him? What kind of terminology, what kind of technology was used?
Yes.
What architectural body science was used to teach that frame? We will never know. Feng ZhiQiang, when he's teaching, he's like, look at me, do this. And then he'll like, you can copy him. He'll show you the moves. You can copy him, and he'll show you things with body and shenfa and movement and all these kind of things. But still, the textbook, the how-to manual of how do I do my legs? How do I do these things? How do I arrange them? Best case scenario for best outcomes is to actually have a living rule book and a living guidebook where you can tell people where to put what body part when, right? Talking about, nei san he, wai san he, right? The internal 3 harmonies, external, what they call liu he, 6 harmonies. You want to talk about that? 6 harmonies is not enough. 6 harmonies is experiential. You have to say, put this with that at this time. Put this with that at that time. These go together. These don't go together. This position, you have to mark out this position and do it a particular way. That, conceptual technology, it is not alive in force out there. It's something that is, in fact, relegated to extinction. A lot of these people who become quite skilled, maybe they didn't learn it that way. So they copied their teacher, and then they expect you to copy them. But without the it's like without the instructional YouTube video to go along with it. You need someone to narrate that thing. You say, put your hands here. Why? Why put your hand here? You know, where are the anchor points and the landmarks to attach this point to that point? And how do these things relate? You know, there has to be more to this than just do what I do. But that's unfortunately not the case. The vast majority of teachers, even the really good martial arts teachers, even the people who are really accomplished, you know, they don't know how to tell you. They can still tell you, watch me, do it like I do it. And then they can give you pointers, fix this, fix that, fix that. But still there's no underlying architecture that's laid in a manual, okay? And there certainly was not from Gene Chen. Gene Chen had lots of things to teach, let me tell you. I was overwhelmed at the time. He had lots of things to teach. But it wasn't an instructional manual. There was a bunch of things where you could, you know, employ. Oh, let me try this. Let me try that. Let me try that. But the overriding manual for the frame did not exist. Okay. And I will say straight up, look, I was a total devotee of Gene Chen for years. Okay. So I'm not, you know, being negative about him. I'm telling the truth. His leg method, his stance method, the structure of his frame was haphazard at best, you know, follow me, do what I do, you know, learn this shape. And his bitter basics, as I call them, were not all that solid. So I can't say I learned great bitter basics from him. I would say I learned a lot of upper level things that were quite interesting. I learned a lot of great applications. I learned some really interesting tuition stuff and a very flowing form and a lot of interesting things, and that had a lot of really important qualities. Okay, that were very useful later. But, you know, when I went to Feng ZhiQiang, I was practicing Gene Chen's thing, and I went to Feng ZhiQiang. And the first thing I noticed, the very first day I started training with him, and it was again, okay, go with me. We're going to go to this secluded area of the park, and we're just going to practice, the two of us. That was it. Not even any talking. It's just like, practice with me, right? He was 73 years old. And I'll tell you, being around him, he had there was a force field. It was an aura around him. It was like, okay, this guy does a lot of Qigong and you could feel it. Okay. He was expansive. So practicing with him, you could just absorb the vibe. You could just absorb, okay, I need more of this thing. There's no name for it. And so I'm practicing with him, and boy, does he look solid. His legs are quiet and he looks solid. Like he knows exactly where he's supposed to be. And he's there and he's sitting heavy on that spot. Like there's no question. He's just sitting there relaxing on that spot. He knows how to sit. And I'm like, geez, I never experienced that before. And I'm watching him, and it's just he's so solid and heavy and expansive at the same time. And immediately it occurred to me, okay, this is the gong li that is missing when I'm learning from Chen Jinghong. Chen Jinghong is what I used to call floating root, where you're kind of hovering above the thing and you're moving around. But Feng ZhiQiang was like, boom, you know, just heavy, like 1,000 pianos dropped at the same time. You know, he was very heavy and moved very slow, very, very relaxed, very determined. And I was like, wow, that's the Gong Li. And all of Feng ZhiQiang's students had that quality. They just sit heavy on their legs and they practice a whole form like that. And I was not ready for that. And that made me sore. I was sore. I was tired, you know, but I absorbed that right away. And I was like, okay, this is the way forward. So I took that back and I started practicing that way. And then I started, you know, upgrading everything, upgrading the firmware of my previous forms, right? And what I did was I started over from square one, because I knew already then. I was studying Chinese and I knew about face and I knew about all these cultural things. And I was like, no, you can't bring your baggage to a new teacher. Now, I was fortunate in the sense that Gene was his disciple. So he was very easy about it all. But still, I had to show up there and I was practicing Gene's thing. And when I went to Feng, I was like a naked person, you know. I was like, okay, I'm yours, starting from the beginning. Okay. And I did exactly what he wanted me to do. And so for some years there, I practiced all of Gene's stuff and all of Feng's stuff separately. Right. So I was in school at the time and I had time. So I was averaging, I practiced probably about 6 hours a day, 3 to 6 hours a day I was practicing. And then I would go to class, you know. And so I took a lot of qualities that I learned from Feng ZhiQiang and I isolated them. You know, I didn't mix and match.